The air in the room was heavy, smelling of old paper and the kind of cold anger that made my fur stand on end. The tall man's hand slammed on the table, and the sharp sound made my whole body tremble. Curled up under the chair, a place that once felt safe, I heard his voice, sharp as a growl. "You only inherited this because you took care of that useless animal." The silence that followed was even louder than the noise, a silence that promised that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. To understand how we ended up in that room, you need to know me. My name is Oscar. I'm a Dachshund with a long body, short little legs, and a heart that always knew who truly loved me. I'm loyal, a bit stubborn, and the best friend a human like my Eleanor could ever have. Before that tense room, there was another, a room with white walls and the smell of cleanliness, where the sunlight seemed to ask permission to enter. That's where Eleanor's family took her, saying it was for the best. I saw her son, the tall man with the thunderous voice, and his wife, with the scent of flowers that didn't come from the earth, giving quick, cold hugs. My Eleanor spent her days sitting by the window, her gaze lost in a place I couldn't reach. Sometimes a silent tear would escape and wet my fur as I rested in her lap. It was my way of telling her she wasn't alone. They thought her life had ended there, in that quiet room. Little did they know. They didn't see me, not really. And most importantly, they had no idea about our secret, a plan that began to take root the day she looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, smiled a true smile. The days in that place were long and all the same color. The sun drew a square of light on the floor, moving ever so slowly from the foot of the door to the opposite wall. It was the only clock that seemed to work there. My Eleanor didn't talk much. She ate the odorless food brought on a noisy tray by a young woman, and then returned to her window, to her silent vigil. Her hands, once so warm and full of life, were always cold now. The visits were the worst part. I could sense their arrival by the smell of the street and haste. The tall son never looked at Eleanor for long. He looked at the walls, the ceiling, the small, shiny rectangle he held in his hands. The daughter-in-law stayed near the door, as if afraid the room's sadness might cling to her expensive clothes. They spoke loudly, with words that lacked the sound of affection. Sometimes the tall man would look at me and make a low, irritated sound in his throat. I knew that sound was meant for me. It was the sound of someone who didn't want me there. I wasn't born in that white room. I arrived later. Before, I lived in a place with many bars and many sad barks. One day, a woman with the smell of soap and gentle hands picked me up. Her name was Anna, and she was the only one who smiled at Eleanor with her eyes. Anna brought me in, hidden under a blanket. Her heart was beating fast, a sound of secrets and hope. She placed me on the floor, next to Eleanor's feet. My human didn't move. She just looked down, with the same tired eyes as always. I approached slowly, sniffed her shoes, and then did the only thing I knew how to do. I nudged my nose against her cold hand. She flinched for a moment, but then slowly, one finger moved and touched my ears, then another. Soon her whole hand was on my head, giving a light, almost forgotten caress. That day, for the first time in that room, I saw the curve of a smile on her face. It wasn't a big smile. It was small, fragile, but it was enough. It was the beginning. That small smile was like the first ray of sun after a very long storm. It was a silent promise that things could be different, and it was the start of our secret adventure, a plan that no one, especially Eleanor's hurried family, could ever imagine. Before I tell you how we, a lady with a giant heart and a stubborn little dog, turned the tables, I need to ask you something. If our story has already warmed a corner of your heart, if you too believe that love can heal, please leave your like to give us a pat and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happened next. Believe me, you won't want to miss the part where we showed everyone their true worth and the faces they made when they found out. The hand that petted me began to carry a new scent. It wasn't just the smell of soap and the loneliness of that room anymore. It was the scent of wet earth, green leaves, and sometimes rain. It all started with a single pot that Anna, the woman with the true smiles, brought. Inside, it was a small plant with 2 leaves that seemed as tired as Eleanor's eyes. At first, Eleanor just looked at the pot, but I saw her fingers twitching, as if remembering a time when they touched life. One day, she placed the pot on the windowsill, where the square of light was strongest. And then, she started talking to it. There were soft whispers, words I didn't understand, but the tone was the same she used with me when she shared a secret. Soon, 1 pot became 2, 2 became 5. The windowsill became too small. Anna, with her complicit heart, helped Eleanor get a small, abandoned patch of land outside our window. That dry, forgotten piece of ground became our project. My mission was very important. I lay on the grass, guarding the tools, scaring off overly bold birds, and warming Eleanor's feet as she knelt to tend to each sprout. The sadness was fading. I could feel it. The silence in the room was no longer one of emptiness, but of peace. Instead of staring at nothing, Eleanor looked at her flowers. Her hands, once always cold, were now warm and often dirty with soil. And she smiled. Big, true smiles that made her eyes shine. Our kingdom of flowers and leaves grew so much that other people from the place came to see it. One day, people with important clothes and clipboards arrived. There was a different buzz in the air. Eleanor's family showed up too, for the first time outside a scheduled visit. They stood a bit apart, looking at the vibrant, colorful garden with confused expressions. They didn't understand how it had happened. And then, one of the important people placed a blue ribbon on our small gate of our garden. The people made a sound like rain with their hands. My Eleanor didn't jump for joy. She just knelt, touched a rose petal, and looked at me. In that look, I saw everything. The victory, the peace, the freedom. And I saw her family, who weren't looking at the flowers. They were looking at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The blue ribbon on our little gate wasn't the end of the story. It was proof, for all eyes to see, that something wonderful had happened. But the real change had already rooted in Eleanor's heart. After that day, she walked with her back straighter. The sound of her laughter became more common, mingling with the hum of bees in our garden. She taught me to dig up small, round potatoes. I was very good at it. She rewarded me with a piece of apple and a scratch behind the ears.
But just like the seasons in the garden, her time changed too. The smell of earth on her hands began to fade. She spent more time sitting in her chair, no longer looking at an empty window, but at our vibrant garden with a serene smile. One morning, I rested my head in her lap, as I always did, but she didn't wake up to pet me. She was quiet, at peace. Anna, the woman with the smiles, cried a lot, and her hug around me was warm and full of longing. And so, we returned to that room, the room from the start of the story, with the smell of old paper and cold anger. I was there, curled up under a chair, and Eleanor's family was there too. The tall man, the woman with the scent of fake flowers. Another man, one I'd never seen, read a paper in a monotonous voice. I didn't understand his words, but I felt the tension rising like the air before a storm. That's when the tall son slammed the table and said the phrase I'll never forget, pointing at me. "You only inherited this because you took care of that useless animal." He was angry because the paper said the garden, now large and funded, would last forever, and that Anna would take care of me with everything I needed for the rest of my life. But then, the man with the papers cleared his throat and picked up another sheet, a letter. It was Eleanor's voice, read by that stranger. The letter silenced the entire room. It said that love was like a garden. What you don't water, dies. She wrote that they visited the walls of her room, but I, Oscar, her useless animal, had visited her soul. And that the greatest legacy she could leave wasn't for the blood that forgot to warm her, but for the love that made her bloom again. Today, I live with Anna. Every morning, we walk through Eleanor's garden. It's big, full of colors and people who smile with their eyes. I see others like her, with hands dirty with soil, finding life in small sprouts. They thought I had no value, but humans forget something simple. The most important things in life aren't the ones you possess, but the ones that possess you. And love? Oh, the love of a lady and her stubborn little dog. That love built a paradise.